Turn, if you would, to Romans chapter 1. We're going to start at verse 14. I am obligated both to the Greeks and the non-Greeks, both to the wise and the foolish. That is why I am so eager to preach the gospel also to you who are in Rome. I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power of God for salvation of everyone who believes, first to the Jew and then to the Gentiles. For in the gospel a righteousness from God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith, from first to last, just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. Lord, we thank you for the day and the opportunity to study your word. Guide us in all things. In your Son's name. Last week we started a study on Romans. We're studying this summer. First part of Romans that we talked about had to do with pretty much as an introduction to the letter that was written to the Romans by Paul. He wrote it with the idea that he was planning on coming there at some time in the future, hopefully sooner than later, even though he indicated that there were some possibilities that it would probably be hindered. He wanted to explain to them the gospel, or the good news of God. He wanted to talk about it, that they might be encouraged together. He wanted to make sure that there was encouragement from his standpoint and from their standpoint together, especially when he arrived there. And he also desired that in the process of this, that he might be able to produce fruit in Rome, fruit that came from his evangelism, his work, and not just the work of others. He wanted to be a part of that, if you will. Today we're looking at the very middle of chapter 1, a few verses in the middle, and as Corey's pointed out, they've kind of selectively taken this first chapter and made 3 lessons out of it, which is kind of difficult to do in many ways, but the part that we're dealing with here today is really kind of the important part. Well, all of it's important, but it is the key to the entire book, because what it is it's basically Paul stating his purpose of everything that's going to be in this letter and what it's about. And he's going to lay it out, and it kind of sets everything else up. If you were writing an outline, this would be the theme. Remember those days. So that would be what we're looking at. First of all, as we read here, Paul says, I'm obligated both to Greeks and non-Greeks. In this particular time, when he's talking about the non-Greeks, who's he talking about? Jews? No. Actually, I thought so too. No. Because most of the time he talks about Gentiles and Jews, Gentiles and Jews. But actually, if you've got another translation, they use a different word. What is it? Barbarians. Okay? The idea being that he's talking specifically at this time, not to Jewish Christians specifically, even though he's going to deal with them, but it's the non-Jewish background Christians, and they're the Greeks, which are those who live basically in the civilized Roman world, speak Greek. Greek was taken over by Rome, so that particular area, but there's a whole lot of the world that was not influenced by the Greeks and their civilization and their thoughts and whatever. For example, places like modern-day Russia, up in places like in there, over into England and places over there that were considered to be barbaric by Roman terms. Okay? And so what he's referring to is he's saying the whole world out there. Okay? Not just those that can read, speak Greek and everything, but those who talk funny also. Say, but basically, the idea being all the world out there, no matter whether you were one or the other. He's called, it says he has an obligation to them. God had called him to preach the gospel. What does gospel mean? Good news. Literally, that's what it means. Good news. And we're going to find throughout the book of Romans, that's what he's talking about, the gospel. When Paul talks in every letter and where he is, he talks about the gospel, the gospel, the gospel, the gospel. And so today, as we look at him introducing what he's going to write about, he's going to be talking about the gospel. And God had called him to preach that. Now remember, when he called him, where did he call him at? Road to Damascus. And the road to Damascus, he told him, he sent a message to him, basically, I got a special job for you. And that was to go to the Gentiles. These folks who were Greek, non-Jews, and barbarians, as Romans would call them, or whatever, to the ones that are out there. All right? He tells us in this verse right here that, he tells us that salvation has come to all men. That's what he's trying to tell us. It's come to all men, first to the Jews, and then to the Gentiles. He's going to say that in here. He says it throughout his other letters in different places. The top of the book, I didn't write all the verses down, but the book takes the text not just from these two verses, it goes back to chapter 15 and chapter 16 at the end, and he starts where Paul talks about some things that he was doing, and in some of those situations, that's what he was saying that he was there to do. He was called to be a minister. What is a minister? Servant. Pretty much literally it means a servant. As a matter of fact, the book will point out in chapter 15, he says he was called to be let's just put it there real quick. Mark it, so I have to look at it. 15. 16? Okay. Yeah. That he is come to be a minister of Christ Jesus to the Gentiles. Also with the priestly duty, which is actually another term for minister, of proclaiming the gospel of God, so that the Gentiles might become an offering acceptable to God. So, as they pointed out, he came to do a couple things. First, he came to serve them as an apostle. Apostle means, literally, messenger. That's what it means. So he came as a special messenger to them. And as his ministry, that was what he was chosen to do, to teach them how to live a holy and acceptable life. And the reason I use that is because in the next context of him ministering to them, he's talking about acting as a priest. And that's what a priest did then. He taught them how to live the way they're supposed to, and at the same time helped shape them in such a way that they would become pleasing to God. And that was his goal with all the Gentiles as he talked to them. So he came to be a minister to the Gentiles, teach them how to live holy and acceptable life. Think of the different books. I think of Ephesians and Colossians come to mind real quick. And he starts talking about the old person or the other way of life. And he starts listing off what? Sin after sin after sin after sin after sin, describing some of the worst people in the world. And he says that's what you were. But now you are. And he describes the new man, full of God, living like God, holy, all these different things. And Paul's ministry was to take these Gentiles, these non-people who had no idea who God was really, and to turn around and teach them how to be holy. They had no idea. You know, everybody did it. It was a way of life. If you've ever read anything about the Roman Empire and why it fell and all that, you can see all the decadence and all the things that happened. It's different from today, by the way. But as you see that, he's trying to show them that just because that's a way of life, that's not right. And he takes them and makes them into a holy people. So when it talks about him and being a minister to them, it's not just teaching them or telling them about Jesus but it's to do even more than it. It's to serve them in such a way as to mold them and make them into a person that's pleasing and acceptable to God. So that was part of his job that he did. And if you look at Ephesians and all the different things, when he lived somewhere, isn't that what he did? As a matter of fact, he lived in a tent and he worked with them and lived with them and talked with them and basically lived the lifestyle right alongside with them in order to show them and teach them. So we see that he was a minister to the Gentiles and doing it. The purpose of that in chapter 16, I think it is, or 15, is to reveal the mystery of God. All right? What's the mystery of God? First of all, what does mystery mean? Unknown. Yeah, you ever gone to the Mystery Theater downtown? I haven't, but I've heard about it. You go in there and it's who did it? Who's the person? There's a mystery. What happened? How did it really happen? There's a mystery here that really it's unique for us because we got it from the beginning when there was no clue in Genesis chapter 2 and 3 as to what was going on and where we were going until we get to the end in Revelation and we see exactly how it all was going and what was transpired with the goal and what was going to happen for eternity. Paul Finally, at this time, the mystery was revealed, and it's Paul's job to reveal that mystery, that unknown, that God's plan to them. How he would create a being that had a choice, that would make that choice. We looked at that in Ephesians in the past, and be able to make that choice when they made a bad choice. And all of the heavens would sit there and say, oh, he sinned, therefore he can no longer be with God. God would show how he can take that person and make him holy again through the death, burial, and resurrection of his Son. So we see that how he would do that in spite of man's shortcomings and bad choices and choices to sin. And in the process of this, how all mankind could receive this blessing, not just the Jews. He's going to repeat that several times in here. He makes a contrast between God's chosen people on earth versus God's chosen people from now on. Later on, he's going to talk about descendants of Abraham, not by birth, but by faith. You know, et cetera, et cetera. So he's going to go on and he's going to talk about that. So his job was to reveal that mystery to these people who had no clue who God was. As a matter of fact, who did they think God was? Apollo, Diana, I don't know all the Greek and Roman gods. That's who they all looked at. And actually, one was a Greek form of another was a Roman name for the same kind of basic person. But they had monuments and temples and all these things, and that's what they worshiped. And to them, I guess that's what God is. And he's trying to say, no, there is a different God, the God, not just these things that people make. And he's going to talk about that throughout Romans. You know, that distinction. And so here he is, he's talking about this, and he goes on, and back in chapter 1, verse 15, he says, that is why I am eager to preach the gospel. In chapter 15, we saw that he preferred preaching in places where Christ was not known. You know? That means he wanted to go to a place like Athens, where there was no church, no knowledge of God. They worshiped unknown gods. He wanted to go to a place like that, and he actually preferred that, according to verse 20 of chapter 15. He wanted to go there. He was a true evangelist in the sense that he liked to go where somebody did not know anything and sit down and show them who God was and what God had done for them.
I just think that's a little bit easier sometimes to take people who know nothing than to convert them from one way of thinking to another.
Personally, yes and no. No, in the sense that it makes me nervous every time I sit down with somebody and I'm not really sure where we're at and where we're going and what to do and blah, blah, blah. Matter of fact, I think I mentioned that last week. It makes me uncomfortable to do that. But it is also much easier in the sense that it's easier to sit down with somebody in Cuba who has no inkling of who God is and no previous biases versus someone in the United States who has a previous bias. So it's a lot easier to take them from a place to somewhere because the biases are not there. So in that case, yes. As a matter of fact, I think I have used, on a Sunday night when we talk about Cuba, I've used that comparison that Cuba is very unique in that with the communist takeover, atheism became the religion, and in doing so, it pretty much wiped out everything. So it's one of the few countries in the Caribbean and Central America and South America that doesn't have the Catholic influence like they do. I've been to Honduras, and it's difficult. Once a Catholic, always a Catholic sometimes. And it's very difficult with those biases to teach some of those people. But in Cuba, they don't have those biases because a lot of that's been erased, even though that was probably the predominant thing before the revolution. But they've had a generation since then that's wiped that out. So a lot of them are just kind of, yeah. And so you've got pretty much a clean slate to work with. And in that sense, it is easier to deal with it from there. It is. And most of them believe in a God, they just don't know what it is or where it is or anything.
I was about to say, and probably that, like in most places, God has placed within us the ability to know that God exists and see it by everything around us, that it is by nature built into us and you want to seek someone, and so maybe you've got a nation there that has not been falsely taught, that still has that desire.
Yeah, and I think that's great, important, and later on in chapter 1, we're going to talk about the fact that there's an inherent knowledge of that, and that's the thing about them. They, in my opinion, even though atheism was the official religion, and they stopped going to the churches and worshiping and all that, I believe that deep down, they believed there was a God. They just had no concept or idea or whatever. And that's one reason that when you start talking about it, they're like, oh, yeah, really? Tell me about it. You know? And so, it's like you said, I think that in many cases there is that strong belief that there is someone, something, and so they're looking for it. And that's why a lot of times I think we're successful, is because we can show them reasonably who that God is and why that. Because a couple weeks ago I tried to do a lesson, didn't do a very good job, but on the non-believer and the believer and the one in between and all that, and the problems or whatever there. One of the things about these people is they are looking for a God. They don't know what, and if you can present a reasonable approach that makes sense, they go, oh, okay. And that's the thing about the God of the Bible. It's the only God, and I use that in the term of the world's idea of God, out there that really has a purpose for man and shows man that he loves him and wants him to be somewhere. Every other God is totally different from that, even if it's a volcano, you know. You do this or you're going to die, or whatever. Well, okay. So there's no real benefit except to live in worshiping one of those others, whereas you can show benefit through the God of the Bible that makes sense. That there is a hereafter, and there is a reason to believe, and there is a way to get there, then people really understand. Anyway, so to answer your question, it's harder and easier. It's easier to lay it out. It's harder for me because it's harder to get into that. But each his own. But to Paul, it was not. He'd rather sit down with that person right now. That's what the Paul is trying to make in chapter 15. And he says, I was eager to sit down with those who had no knowledge and work with them. And I guess that may have come from the many years he spent working with the Jews and their biases. He may have thought it was easier to do his job than Peter doing his. That could be, if you think about it. All right, anyway, moving on. Later on, we're going to hear him say in chapter 10, talking about him preaching. How can you hear without a preacher? How can you hear without a preacher? Throughout the New Testament, we hear that. Actually, in the Old Testament too. How can you know God if somebody doesn't show it to you? And so that was his goal, to be that one. All right, the next thing, we start getting into the heart of the matter, is the gospel is the power of God. All right? In verse 16, a verse that most of us know, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. Sometimes we stop there. I'm not ashamed of the gospel because of the power of God for salvation of everyone who believes. All right, first of all, the gospel is preached by Paul. And several years back, Sue and I went to a study or whatever. What's the name of it? They have the little Bibles. Weekend. No?
Weekend.
Okay, the ones where we use the Bible, went through that little Bible that had all the different things. Okay, weekend. And in this, they went through step by step, and you had a little Bible that you go from one verse to the next to the next. And one of the biggest important things that I saw in that is they clearly pulled the scripture out and laid out what the gospel is. Too many times, even in the church, we get confused about what the gospel is. What's the gospel? Do what? There you go. That's the gospel for our salvation. Lived, died for our salvation. That's one way to put it. Too many people think, oh, this is the gospel. This is not. This is the Word of God. And the Word of God is the gospel proclaimed. The gospel is the good news how man can be saved. And we go to 1 Corinthians 15. It's pretty clear there. It says, I want to remind you of the gospel I preached to you which you received, so there's a message, you received it, and on which you've taken your stand, which means you didn't walk away, you're still there. For by this gospel you are saved, if you hold permanent to the word I preached to you, otherwise you believe in vain. For what I received, I passed on to you is first important, that Christ died for our sins, according to the Scriptures, and he's talking about the Old Testament Scriptures, because the New Testament was not written. He was writing it, remember? Okay, according to the prophets, the prophecies, he died for our sins, that he was buried, and that he was raised on the third day, according to the Scriptures. So basically, that is the message of the gospel, the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, and our acceptance thereof. And so when we look at that, that's what we find that Paul has proclaimed. As a matter of fact, I think Corey pointed out that he was either at Corinth or leaving Corinth, or had been at Corinth when he wrote this at one time. 1 Corinthians was written way back there. It's the gospel that he preached. In Colossians, it says the gospel is the power to save. In Colossians chapter 1, he tells us that once we were alienated or separated from God and were enemies in your minds because of our evil behavior, but now he has reconciled us by Christ's physical body through death, in order to present us as a holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation. So we see once again that power, that gospel, is what saves. It takes us from being separated to God to reconciliation with God. And that's one of the things we teach, and when we talk about evangelism, is we teach in Genesis chapter 3 that we were separated from God. How do you get back? Jesus brings us back. So he's in here talking about that. But it wasn't just through his death made holy without blemish. It was contingent upon, it goes on to say, if you continue in your faith, established and firm, not moved from the hope held out in the gospel. This is the gospel you heard and been proclaimed to every preacher. So it was not just the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. It's what Jesus did. It's also us holding firm to that faith, our trust in him. And it's explained in Colossians. So as we look further, back in Romans, as he goes on, he starts detailing how he's going to be talking about this book. He goes on to say, okay, I'm not ashamed of the gospel, because it is the power for salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew and then to the Gentile. We've talked about that. Because in the gospel, a righteousness from God is revealed. Okay? And then a righteousness that is by faith, from first to last. So let's take a look at that for just a second. All right? The gospel of God is, first of all, a righteousness from God. First of all, what is righteousness? A goodness, in our terms, but it's more than a goodness, it's a holiness, pure, God's right way. Okay? This righteousness, it says, is from God. What does the Old Testament taught? Excuse me. What did people believe the Old Testament taught? Saul. What did Saul think it taught? Righteousness was from man. Matter of fact, we talked about the rich young ruler that said, I've done it all from my youth. Paul said, you think you've done it all? I've done it better. I mean, that's what Paul said. Paul said it. Okay? A righteousness that comes from man. Too many times, and every other religion teaches a righteousness from man. If you'll throw your baby in the fire, you'll have a good year. Or whatever, you know. Or if you will do such and such, then you will get. It's all about your actions and your works and things you're doing. What he's trying to say is it's not about what man does because man falls. This is the righteousness that comes from God. The question is, what is that? How do we get that? And The rest of the book's going to detail it more, but basically it's talking about something that comes from God, which is God's grace. It's the term you can use if you want to. It's the grace of God. It's a gift from God that He and He alone can give if He chooses to give. Okay? So it's from God's grace that our righteousness is given to us. It doesn't come from what we do, our goodness, our holiness, because if so, it would be measured about here. Most of us way down here. Let's be optimistic and say maybe here. Whereas God, that's the part you can't measure. Comes from God, who is, by definition, holy and righteous, which is the problem we mentioned about being alienated and not being reconciled with Him in the first place, because you can't be with God if you're not in a pure and holy situation. And so we see God's grace and how He gives us this righteousness, this holiness, this whatever comes from Him. And it's seen in His action. God loved us, but He didn't just talk about it. God acted. And His action to provide that holiness is what? Death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. That's why when we talk about the gospel, that's why Paul talks about Corinthians. He's talking about the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. So when we look at the grace of God, it's something He did because, first of all, He loved us and wanted to. And the second thing is, He acted upon that desire by giving Himself in the form of His Son. Okay? But it doesn't stop there. Too many times we can say, well, yeah, but it doesn't stop there. It goes on and it says, this is revealed in a righteousness that comes from faith. A faith that is from beginning to end, first to last, faith to faith. But basically it comes from faith. So we talk about man's faith being from first to last. What does that mean? I believe. Okay, now I go do whatever. Is that first to last? No, that means from beginning to end, it's all about faith, 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 faith. My job is all about having faith. Okay? So salvation, this gospel comes from my faith, man's faith. Without it, there is no salvation. It doesn't come from what I call mental assent or basic belief. And too many times in the Bible, we have a hard time with that because it's been translated into English between belief and faith. We use those interchangeable, and in one context, it really means belief, like that Satan does. He believed there was God, he walked and talked with him, but he doesn't do anything about it. And then the other, we see that people responded and did something. So we talk about faith, we're talking about an active belief, not just a basic or passive belief. Okay? And it comes from, man's faith comes from trust in God. So a lot of times I like to equate the faith that God requires of us as trust. It's an active belief that says that if I want to be saved, and He says, jump into my arms, we jump right into His arms. You know, we don't just say, yeah, I think He'll save me. We do something about what He tells me to do. And so it's an active belief. And once again, when we want to see man's faith, it's seen in man's action. Our death, burial, and resurrection. Okay? First of all, in baptism, which will be pointed out. But not just in baptism, it's in our everyday life. Jesus Himself said we're to do what? Crucify ourselves daily? Take up our cross and walk for Him? What, just today? Every day. You know, so when He talks about that, He's talking about if you trust me, if you really have the faith, then you will act. And I think it's interesting that for God's grace to be complete, He loved and He acted. For man's faith to be complete, we love Him and we act. Why would He ask us anything less? Too many times people try to take this verse and try to say that the whole book is about faith. They forgot the words before that. It's the gospel. That's what the book's about. which includes the righteousness that comes from God and the faith of man. And in both cases, it required us to give of not just our hearts, and God give of His heart, but to give of our actions. Remember the biggest problem God had with Israel? A lot of times they were going through the motions. They had their actions right, but their heart wasn't in it. But time and time again, He got on to the people who had the heart right, talked about it, and didn't do what He said. God has always wanted the two to be together, harmonized, just like He is. His love was in harmony with the way He acted. And that's what He looked for us in our faith. So when we look at this, and when we talk about the gospel, we look at God's grace and man's faith. As a matter of fact, he finishes this up by a quotation that says, the righteous, or the holy, and we've already defined that holiness only comes from God, will live by faith, given of themselves, just like God gave of Himself. Okay? So without God's grace, there is no salvation. Let's just be real clear. I can believe in Him all I want, and I can say, save me, and try to do everything that He said, but if He makes a choice, matter of fact, He's going to talk about God chooses who He chooses in this book. If God doesn't make the choice and do something about it, there is no salvation. We know He did. Then the next part is, without man making a choice and putting his faith in Him, there is no salvation. So, it's not working your way there, as some would have you say, but it is about doing as God said, which is living a life like He wants you to, and doing the things He said, and turning to Him when you fail down, to let Him make up the difference, to take care of you and bring you in anyway. It takes both. Okay? The gospel, basically, if you want to put it in mathematical terms, I always write as grace plus faith equals salvation. If you take either one of those and put a zero in their place, you're not going to end up with salvation. It requires both our heart and our hands. God so loved, He gave. Man is supposed to love God so much that He gives. God tells us flat out, give up everything. Love the Father, Son, daughter, everything. The rest of Romans is defining what grace is. It's defining what faith is. And when He defines that grace of God in man's faith by the actions that they both do, then you'll see how the gospel works. So as we look at the next lessons that go through this, and we look and you hear, call on the name of the Lord, sure. We're supposed to call on the name of the Lord. He says, be united with Christ in baptism. He means, yeah, that's part of faith. That's part of man's action. And He talks about God giving Him His Son and whatever. That's His grace. And He talks about that man's not worthy. That's right. He's talking about man's righteousness not being the same as God's. Over and over throughout this, the rest of the lessons that we look at throughout the next several weeks, months, is going to be defining God's grace, which is what He did and why, and man's faith, what He's to do and why. Okay? So as you look at those, keep that in mind. Too many times I've seen where preachers and different people out in the world, in Christendom, let me put it that way, will talk about it being about faith, and they'll emphasize faith. Yes, but it has to be in the context of it's all of this is what is comprised of faith. Talk about grace, it's all of that. That make sense? All right, got a minute or two. Questions, comments? I don't get out as early as Corey does, I know. But I held you over in one lesson 2 weeks ago, so here's your chance to get out early. All right. Next week, we're going to take a look at the latter part of chapter 1. The latter part of chapter 1 does what John was talking about, defines why every human on this earth should know that there's a God. They may not understand or know who He is, but they should know that there is. Next week, Mark's actually gonna teach the class, in case y'all didn't know or hadn't figured it out. This, Summer Porter is gonna teach this, but, he has guard duty and different things or whatever, so whenever he's out, myself and Corey will fill in for him or whatever, but he's gonna be pretty much teaching the class. All right, thank you much.